The door to the boarding house slammed so hard the windows rattled. And Zachary Greene watched 3 men storm past her window with faces red as autumn apples, muttering curses about women who took too long getting ready and how they had places to be. She pressed her hand against the cool glass and felt something tighten in her chest, familiar and unwelcome. It was 1876 in Custer, South Dakota, and she had been here exactly 3 weeks. Long enough to know that nobody in this mining town had patience for a woman who needed time, who required more than a few hurried moments to feel human again after everything she had lost back in Missouri. Her sister had been the pretty one, the fast one, the one who could pin her hair in 30 seconds and look like a painting. Zachary had always been slower, more deliberate, needing to check each button twice and smooth her skirts until they hung just right. Their mother had called it being thorough. Their father had called it being difficult. After the fever took both her parents and her sister in the span of 2 brutal weeks, Zachary had sold everything and bought a ticket west, chasing rumors of work and new beginnings in the Black Hills. The boarding house keeper, Mrs. Patterson, had been kind enough at first, but even she had started making pointed comments about the bathroom and how long Zachary occupied it each morning. There were 8 women sharing 2 washrooms, and Zachary knew she was disrupting the careful schedule they had established long before her arrival. But rushing made her hands shake, made her feel like she was forgetting something essential, made her feel like she was still standing in that Missouri farmhouse, watching everything she knew disappear into wooden boxes in the ground. She turned from the window and studied her reflection in the small mirror above her dresser. 22 years old, with dark blonde hair that refused to cooperate and eyes the color of creek water in spring. Not ugly, not beautiful. Just somewhere in the middle where men looked past you to find someone more interesting. She had a job sewing at the general store, and she was good at it because being good at things required time and patience and careful attention. 3 things she had in abundance, and 3 things nobody seemed to value. A knock rattled her door. "Miss Greene, there is a gentleman caller for you downstairs." Zachary froze with her hairbrush mid-stroke. Nobody called on her. She knew exactly 4 people in Custer, and 3 of them were women who worked at the store with her. She set down the brush and smoothed her blue cotton dress, checked her collar, adjusted her sleeves, took a breath, and then descended the narrow stairs to the parlor where Mrs. Patterson waited with an expression caught between disapproval and curiosity. The man standing by the fireplace was not what she expected. He stood well over 6 feet tall with shoulders that seemed too wide for the modest room, wearing buckskin trousers and a worn flannel shirt that stretched across a chest built from hard labor and harder living. His hair was dark brown, longer than was fashionable, touching his shoulders in waves that suggested he cut it himself without much concern for style. His face was all strong angles, weathered from sun and wind, with a jaw covered in dark stubble and eyes so intensely blue they seemed almost unnatural against his tanned skin. "Miss Greene." His voice was deep and quiet, the kind of voice that did not need volume to command attention. "My name is Wyatt Garrison. I apologize for calling without introduction, but I have a business proposition that may interest you." She descended the last 2 steps slowly, aware of Mrs. Patterson hovering near the doorway like a hawk watching rabbits. "Mr. Garrison, I am afraid you have me at a disadvantage. I do not believe we have met." "We have not." He did not move closer, did not invade her space the way some men did, assuming their size gave them rights to proximity. "I live up in the mountains west of here. I came down to town to sell furs and heard at the general store that you are a seamstress of considerable skill." "I do alterations and mending," she said carefully. "Some dressmaking when there is demand." I need clothing made. He said it simply, without embarrassment. I have the materials. Bear hide, deer leather, some cloth I traded for. I have been wearing the same 3 shirts for 2 years, and they are more whole than fabric at this point. The woman who usually does my sewing passed away last winter, and nobody else wants to travel up to my cabin. How far up? Zachary asked. About 8 miles into the hills. I have a place near a creek. Good hunting. Quiet. I would pay you well for the work, and I would come down to fetch you and bring you back safely whenever you needed. It would be several days of work, I expect, and I have a spare room where you could stay properly. Nothing improper about the arrangement. Mrs. Patterson made a small noise that suggested she had many opinions about what was and was not proper. Zachary studied Wyatt Garrison's face, looking for the signs she had learned to recognize in men. The ones who looked at women like they were merchandise. The ones who smiled too much or stood too close. The ones whose eyes made promises their words did not speak. She found none of those signs in Wyatt Garrison. He looked tired, practical, and utterly sincere. "May I think about it?" she asked. "Of course." He reached into his shirt pocket and produced a small piece of paper. "I will be at the Silver Creek Hotel until tomorrow afternoon. Send word there if you are interested. If not, I will not trouble you again." He gave a small nod that was almost a bow, acknowledged Mrs. Patterson with polite courtesy, and left. The room felt larger after he departed, as though his presence had compressed the very air. "Absolutely not," Mrs. Patterson said immediately. "Going into the mountains with a strange man, you might as well paint a sign saying you have no sense." But Zachary was thinking about the way he had stood carefully distant, the way he had offered her time to decide, the way he had not rushed her or demanded immediate answers. She was thinking about 8 miles of distance from people who slammed doors and complained about her careful habits. She was thinking about work that would pay better than the few dollars a week she made at the store. She was thinking about the fact that for the first time since arriving in Custer, someone had waited for her without complaint. That evening, she asked careful questions at the general store. The owner, Mr. Hobbs, knew of Wyatt Garrison. "Mountain man through and through," he said. "Comes down 3, maybe 4 times a year to trade furs and stock up on supplies. Pays in cash, keeps to himself, never causes trouble. Lost his wife about 5 years back, some kind of fever, and he has been alone up there ever since. Honest as they come, far as I can tell." Her co-worker, Sarah Mendez, had different information. "I heard he killed a man once with his bare hands," she whispered, "during a claim dispute. They say he is dangerous when provoked." But the third co-worker, an older woman named Ruth, shook her head. "That is nonsense. What happened was some men tried to jump his claim when he first settled up there, and he defended himself. 2 against 1, and he came out standing. That is not murder. That is survival. This is the Black Hills. Girls, the law is whatever you can enforce yourself out in those mountains." Zachary worked through her shift with her mind only half present, her hands doing their familiar work while her thoughts wandered up into the hills. When she returned to the boarding house that evening, Mrs. Patterson was waiting with another lecture about propriety and danger and foolish young women who did not listen to wisdom. But that night, lying in her narrow bed, Zachary thought about how her sister would have already said yes, would have been packed and ready in 5 minutes, would have seized the adventure without hesitation. She thought about how her mother would have told her to be careful, but would have understood the appeal of distance and solitude. She thought about how her father would have forbidden it entirely, which might have been exactly why she wanted to do it. The next morning, she took even longer than usual getting ready, checking and rechecking her small traveling bag, making sure she had her sewing supplies, her extra dress, her nightgown, her brush, her Bible that had been her grandmother's. Mrs. Patterson made pointed comments about breakfast getting cold. The other boarders sighed and shifted impatiently in the hallway. Zachary ignored them all and took her time. By mid-morning, she had walked to the Silver Creek Hotel and asked for Wyatt Garrison. He came down from his room looking surprised to see her, his hair still damp as though he had just washed it. "I will take the work," she said. "When would we leave?" Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but something warmer than the neutral courtesy he had shown before. "I need to finish my business in town today. Could you be ready tomorrow morning? I will come to the boarding house at sunrise." "I will be ready," she said. She was not ready at sunrise. She was ready 30 minutes later, having double-checked everything, reorganized her bag twice, changed her dress once, and rebraided her hair because the first attempt had not satisfied her. When she finally emerged from the boarding house, Wyatt Garrison was waiting beside a sturdy pack horse and a beautiful gray mare, both laden with supplies. "I apologize," she said immediately, waiting for the irritation, the complaint, the impatient words she had heard so many times before. He looked up from checking the mare's saddle and raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "I took longer than expected. I know you said sunrise." Wyatt tilted his head slightly, studying her face. Then he did something she did not expect. He smiled. It was small and subtle, barely there. But it transformed his severe features into something almost gentle. "Miss Greene, I live in the mountains where the seasons change when they are ready, and the animals hunt on their own schedule, and the weather does not care about my plans. I have got all the time in the world for you to be ready proper. No point starting a journey flustered." Something in her chest loosened, a knot she had not realized was there. "Thank you," she said quietly. He helped her onto the mare with a steady hand, his strength evident in the ease with which he lifted her into the saddle. His hands were calloused and rough but careful, treating her with the same gentle attention he gave his horses. Then he mounted his own horse, a large roan gelding that suited his size, and they began the journey west into the hills. The town fell away behind them as they climbed into the pine forests that covered the Black Hills. The morning air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of sap and earth. Wyatt did not rush the horses, kept them to a steady walk that accommodated her inexperience. He did not demand conversation, but answered her questions when she asked them, his voice carrying easily in the quiet. "How long have you lived up here?" she asked. 7 years. Came out after the war, looking for somewhere away from people and their complications. Found this valley with good water and plenty of game, built a cabin, and that was that." "You were a soldier?" "For a time." He did not elaborate, and she did not press. The war had ended 11 years ago, but its shadow still touched everyone in different ways. They rode for 3 hours before stopping to rest the horses beside a narrow creek. Wyatt produced jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags and handed her portions without comment. The food was plain but satisfying, and she ate slowly while watching the water flow over smooth stones. "Why did you come to Custer?" he asked. She told him about the fever, about losing her family, about selling the farm and heading west because staying in Missouri meant drowning in memories. He listened without interruption, his blue eyes focused on her face with an attention that felt both intense and completely safe. "I am sorry for your losses," he said when she finished. "Fever is cruel. It takes people quick without giving them or anyone else time to prepare." "Do you have family?" she asked. "Had a brother. He died at Gettysburg. My parents passed before that, different times, different causes. My wife, Margaret lasted 3 years up here before the fever got her too. After that, I stopped wanting family. Too much risk of more loss. They sat in comfortable silence for a while before continuing the journey. The terrain grew steeper, the trees thicker. Wyatt pointed out landmarks, teaching her the geography so she could find her way if needed. A distinctive split boulder, a lightning-struck pine, a meadow where elk gathered at dawn. In case you ever need to come down yourself, he explained. Always good to know the path. It was nearly afternoon when they reached his cabin. It sat in a clearing surrounded by tall pines, with the creek running 30 yards to the south and mountains rising in every direction. The cabin was larger than she expected, built from solid logs with a stone chimney and real glass windows. A covered porch stretched across the front. A barn stood to the east, and she could see chickens scratching in a fenced yard beside it. "It is beautiful," she said honestly. He dismounted and helped her down, then began unloading the supplies. "Not fancy, but it is solid. Stays warm in winter, cool enough in summer. I will show you around once we get everything inside." The cabin's interior was surprisingly clean and well organized. A large main room held a stone fireplace, a handmade table with 4 chairs, and shelves lined with supplies and books. A ladder led to a loft where she could see a bed. 2 doors opened off the main room. "That one is storage," Wyatt said, pointing to the left door. "That one is the spare room, which is yours while you are here. It has a bed and a dresser. Not much else, but it is private and the door has a latch inside." He showed her the room, which was indeed simple but clean, with a real bed frame and mattress, a wooden dresser, and a braided rug on the floor. A small window looked out toward the creek. "I will sleep in the loft," he continued. "I set up a curtain for the wash area in the corner there, with a basin and pitcher. The outhouse is behind the cabin, about 20 yards, well marked. I keep a rifle by the front door and another in the barn. If you are ever here alone and trouble comes, fire 3 shots in the air, and I will come running from wherever I am." "Do you expect trouble?" she asked. "No, but I prepare for it anyway. That is how you survive up here." He was true to his word about propriety. He gave her space, kept appropriate distance, and treated her with a courtesy that felt old-fashioned and entirely welcome. That evening, he cooked dinner, a venison stew with wild onions and root vegetables that tasted better than anything she had eaten in weeks. They ate across the table from each other while he explained what he needed. 4 shirts, 2 pairs of trousers, a winter coat if you can manage it with the bear hide. I have measurements written down that Margaret took before she passed, and I have not changed size. I also have some tears in my current clothes that need mending, and my winter blanket has a hole the mice got to. "I can do all of that," she said. "May I see the materials?" He brought out bundles of leather, hide, and cloth, all of good quality. She examined them with her seamstress's eye, already planning patterns and stitching methods. It would indeed take several days, maybe a week if she did it properly. "I will not rush you," Wyatt said, as though reading her thoughts. "Do it right. That is what matters." That night, she lay in the small bedroom, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the mountain. Wind in the pines, the creek's constant murmur, an owl calling somewhere distant. She heard Wyatt moving quietly in the loft, settling in for sleep. She felt safer than she had in months. The next morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. By the time she had dressed and braided her hair, taking her time as was her habit, Wyatt had breakfast ready. "I am sorry," she said again. "I know I am slow in the mornings." He poured her coffee and shook his head. "Miss Greene, I am going to keep telling you until you believe me. I do not care about slow. Slow usually means careful, and careful is good. My wife used to take an hour every morning, and I never once complained because when she was done, she was ready for the day proper. You take whatever time you need. She felt something warm bloom in her chest, something that had been frozen since Missouri. She set up her sewing station at his table, spreading out the materials and organizing her supplies with meticulous care. Wyatt went about his daily work, checking his traps, chopping wood, tending the chickens and his pair of goats. But he always came back to check if she needed anything. Water, better light, different thread. The work was absorbing and satisfying. She cut patterns from old newspaper, measured twice, and began with the shirts because they were most urgently needed. The cloth he had was good quality cotton, sturdy and well woven. She worked with steady patience, her stitches small and even. Wyatt would sit across from her sometimes, repairing his traps or sharpening knives, comfortable in the shared silence. Other times, he read from his collection of books, an eclectic mix of classics, practical manuals, and poetry that surprised her. Margaret loved to read, he explained when he noticed her looking at the shelves. She had them sent from back east. I kept them all. Seemed wrong to let them go. You must miss her, Zachary said softly. Every day. But time makes it different. Less sharp, more like an old ache you learn to carry. She was good people. Deserved better than dying young in a mountain cabin. She married you and came up here. That suggests she thought this life was worthwhile. He looked at her with those intense blue eyes, and something passed between them, some understanding that did not need words. The days developed a rhythm, mornings where she took her time getting ready while he made breakfast without complaint. Long hours of focused sewing while he worked nearby or ventured out to check his trap lines. Afternoons where he would sometimes take her walking to show her the surrounding area, teaching her about plants and animals and weather signs. Evenings where they cooked together and talked about everything and nothing. She learned that he had educated himself through books, that he had a dry sense of humor that emerged unexpectedly, that he was patient with everything except cruelty and carelessness. He learned that she had wanted to be a teacher before her family died, that she loved mathematics and the precise logic of numbers, that she could identify birds by their songs. On the fourth day, she finished the first 2 shirts and held them up for his inspection. He tried one on, and it fit perfectly, the shoulders accommodating his broad frame, the sleeves the right length for his long arms. This is fine work, Miss Greene. Better than I expected, and my expectations were already high. Please call me Zachary, she said. Miss Greene feels too formal after you have seen me every morning with my hair half braided and my face still puffy from sleep. He smiled that small smile. Only if you call me Wyatt. And for the record, you look just fine in the mornings. Honest and real, which is more appealing than all the powder and paint in the world. She felt heat rise in her cheeks and focused intently on folding the shirt. That evening, a summer storm rolled through the mountains, bringing thunder that shook the cabin and lightning that turned the world white. Zachary stood at the window watching nature's violence, while Wyatt sat near the fire, unconcerned. Does it frighten you? She asked. Being up here alone when storms come? No. The cabin is solid and well grounded. Lightning usually hits the tall trees, not down here in the clearing. I have been through dozens of storms up here. They are loud, but rarely dangerous if you are prepared. A particularly close strike made her jump, and he stood, crossing to stand beside her at the window. His presence was warm and solid, reassuring without being intrusive. When I was young, he said quietly, I was afraid of storms. My mother used to tell me that thunder was just the clouds having a conversation, arguing about where to go next made it less frightening, thinking about clouds bickering like old married folks. She laughed despite her nervousness. That is a sweet image. She was a sweet woman, practical but sweet. They stood together, watching the storm until it passed, leaving the world clean and dripping. That night, she realized she had not thought about Missouri or her losses for hours. She had been too occupied with the present, with the work and the companionship and the strange, unexpected comfort of this mountain cabin. By the end of the first week, she had completed all 4 shirts and 1 pair of trousers. The work was good, her best effort, and Wyatt praised each piece with genuine appreciation. But she found herself slowing down deliberately, taking extra time on the details because the thought of returning to Custer and the boarding house felt increasingly unappealing. Wyatt seemed in no hurry either. He found additional projects for her. A tear in his tent canvas, new mittens for winter, a cushion cover for his chair that had worn through. One morning, after she had taken her usual careful time getting ready, she found him on the porch with 2 fishing poles. "The creek has trout," he said. "I thought we might catch lunch before you start sewing, if you're interested." She was interested. They walked to the creek together, and he showed her how to bait the hook and where to cast the line. They sat on the bank in companionable silence, waiting for the fish to bite. The morning sun filtered through the pines, and a light breeze carried the scent of wildflowers from a nearby meadow. "Do you get lonely up here?" she asked. "Sometimes," he admitted, "especially winter when I am snowed in for weeks at a time. But lonely is different than being around people and feeling alone anyway. I had enough of that in the war, surrounded by thousands of men and feeling completely isolated. I understand that. I felt alone in Missouri after my family died, even though the neighbors kept visiting and bringing food and offering sympathy. And I have felt alone in Custer, surrounded by people who do not have patience for how I am. Their impatience is their problem, not yours," Wyatt said firmly. "You are careful and thorough, and those are good qualities. The world tells people, especially women, that they need to hurry, need to fit into tight little schedules and meet everyone else's expectations. But that is nonsense. Life is not a race." Her line tugged, and he helped her reel in a beautiful trout. They caught 3 more before heading back to the cabin. Wyatt cleaned the fish with efficient skill while she watched, learning the technique. They cooked them in his iron skillet with butter and wild herbs, and she thought it was the best meal she had ever eaten. That afternoon, while she worked on the 2nd pair of trousers, Wyatt sat across from her reading. He would glance up occasionally, and she would feel his eyes on her, warm and attentive. Not intrusive or demanding, just present. When she looked up, he would not look away embarrassed, would just hold her gaze for a moment and offer that subtle smile before returning to his book. She realized she was falling in love with him. The thought should have terrified her. She barely knew him, had been here less than 2 weeks, had sworn after Missouri that she would never risk her heart again. But nothing about Wyatt felt like risk. He felt like safety and steadiness and a kind of quiet strength that did not need to prove itself. That evening, as they cleaned up after dinner, she worked up the courage to speak. "Wyatt, I have been thinking." "About what?" He dried the plate she handed him and stacked it carefully on the shelf. "About Custer, about the boarding house, about going back there." He went very still, his hands pausing mid-motion. "And?" "I do not want to. Go back, I mean. I like it here. I like the quiet and the mountains and the work. I like not having to rush or apologize for taking my time. I like your company." He set down the plate slowly and turned to face her fully. "Zachary, I need to be clear about what you are saying. Are you asking to stay longer, or are you asking something else?" Her heart pounded. "I suppose I am asking if there might be a reason to stay permanently. If you might want company up here that is not just temporary. I would like nothing more." His voice was rough with emotion. "I have been trying to figure out how to ask you to stay, without making you feel pressured or obligated. These past days having you here have reminded me what it feels like to have a home, instead of just a shelter. But I do not want you making hasty decisions based on gratitude or fear of going back." "It is not hasty," she said. "I am never hasty about anything, as you have noticed. And it is not gratitude, though I am grateful. It is that I feel more myself here with you than I have anywhere else. You let me be exactly who I am without trying to change me or rush me or make me feel insufficient." He reached out slowly, giving her time to step back if she wanted. When she did not move, he cupped her face in his large, calloused hands, with infinite gentleness. "You have never been insufficient," he said. "You are careful and kind and skilled and so pretty it makes my chest hurt to look at you. I started falling for you the second morning when you apologized again for taking your time. And I realized you had been made to feel bad about something that is just part of who you are. I wanted to find everyone who ever rushed you and have a few words with them." She laughed, feeling tears prick her eyes. "That would be a long list. I have got time." Then he kissed her, soft and careful, asking rather than taking. She leaned into him, her hands finding the solid strength of his chest, feeling his heart beating as fast as hers. The kiss deepened slowly, carefully, a question and an answer all at once. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "Stay here and be my wife and take all the time you need for everything. I will wake up every morning grateful that you are here, and I will never once complain about waiting." "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." They stood in the kitchen holding each other while the light faded outside and the crickets began their evening song. Zachary felt something she had not felt since before the fever. A sense of being exactly where she belonged, with exactly who she was meant to be with. The next morning, she took even longer than usual getting ready because she wanted to look her best when they rode down to Custer to make arrangements. Wyatt waited on the porch, whittling a piece of wood into what looked like a small bird, completely content. When she finally emerged, he looked up and his face lit with a smile that was not small or subtle, but wide and genuine and full of love. "Worth every second," he said. They rode down to Custer together, and the whole way Zachary kept looking at him. This strong, patient mountain man who had somehow seen her exactly as she was and decided that was precisely what he wanted. When they reached the town, people stared at them riding side by side, the tiny seamstress and the massive trapper. But she did not care about their opinions anymore. They went first to the general store where Mr. Hobbs raised his eyebrows but offered congratulations. They arranged for a few supplies to be sent up to the cabin, items Zachary would need if she was making this permanent. Then they went to the boarding house, where Mrs. Patterson opened the door, already frowning. "Miss Greene, where have you been? You have been gone over a week without proper notice, and we rented your room to someone else." "That is fine," Zachary said calmly. "I came to collect my belongings because I am getting married and moving to the mountains." Mrs. Patterson looked between Zachary and Wyatt, her mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. "This is highly irregular. You barely know this man." "I know him well enough," Zachary replied. "And he knows me, which is more important." They collected her few possessions, including the small trunk that held her mother's dishes and her grandmother's quilt. Wyatt carried everything easily, loading it onto the pack horse. Sarah and Ruth came out to say goodbye, both of them teary but happy for her. "You look different," Ruth said, hugging her tight. "Lighter somehow." "I feel different," Zachary admitted. The circuit preacher was not due in Custer for another month, but there was a retired minister living at the edge of town who agreed to perform a simple ceremony that afternoon. They had no guests except Mr. Hobbs and his wife, who Wyatt had known for years, and Ruth, who had insisted on coming. Zachary wore her best dress, a gray cotton with blue trim that brought out her eyes. Wyatt had changed into one of the new shirts she had made him, and he had trimmed his beard and tied his hair back. He looked impossibly handsome, and the way he looked at her made her feel beautiful. The ceremony was brief and simple. When the minister asked if Wyatt would take Zachary as his wife, he said, "I will," with absolute certainty. When Zachary was asked the same, she took a breath and said, "I will," with equal confidence, feeling no doubt whatsoever. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Wyatt stepped close, sliding one arm around her waist and cupping her cheek with his other hand. He kissed her thoroughly, not at all chaste or appropriate for public viewing, and she heard Ruth giggle and Mrs. Hobbs gasp. When he finally released her, she was dizzy and blushing and absolutely certain she had made the right choice. They celebrated with a dinner at the town's small restaurant, but both of them were eager to return to the mountains. As the sun began to set, they mounted their horses and headed west, leaving Custer behind. The ride home, because it was home now, felt different than the first time. Zachary was not a guest or an employee, but a wife heading to her own cabin. When they arrived in the clearing, the last light was painting everything gold and rose. Wyatt dismounted and helped her down, but instead of setting her on her feet, he lifted her into his arms and carried her across the threshold of the cabin, a tradition older than either of them. Inside, he set her down gently and lit the lamps, filling the space with warm light. The cabin looked the same as it had that morning, but everything felt different now. This was not his space that she was borrowing. This was theirs. "I moved my things down from the loft earlier this week," Wyatt said, gesturing to the spare room that had been hers. "Figured if you said yes, we would need the bigger space. The loft can be storage or maybe someday a child's room if we are lucky enough." The implication made her blush again, but it also made her heart sing. A future together. Children, possibly. Years of mornings where she could take her time and he would wait patiently. Years of dinners and conversations and shared silence. That night, he made love to her with the same careful patience he showed everything else. Taking his time, learning what made her sigh and gasp, never rushing or demanding. She fell asleep in his arms, feeling safe and cherished, and wanted exactly as she was. The next morning, she woke before him and lay in their bed, watching him sleep. In sleep, his face was softer, younger, the hard edges smoothed by rest. She traced the line of his jaw lightly, and his eyes opened, immediately focusing on her with perfect awareness. "Good morning, wife," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning, husband," she replied, testing the words and finding them perfect. He pulled her closer and kissed her slowly, lazily, without urgency. What do you want to do today? Everything. Nothing. Whatever we feel like. I want to learn how to live up here properly, how to tend the garden and preserve food and recognize animal tracks. I want to finish your winter coat because you will need it when the snow comes. I want to organize our home and make curtains for the windows and maybe learn to cook better. I want 1,000 things, but none of them are urgent. Then we will do them as we are ready, he said. One thing at a time, taking as long as we need. They spent that day working on various projects, moving through tasks at their own pace. Wyatt taught her how to milk the goats, a skill that took patience and gentle hands, both of which she had. She began work on his winter coat, cutting the bear hide carefully and planning the construction. They weeded the garden together in the afternoon, and he told her about each plant and when it would be ready to harvest. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching stars emerge, she leaned against his shoulder and felt his arm come around her waist. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. "More than I knew I could be," she answered honestly. "Are you?" "Yes. I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone up here, and I had made peace with that. But having you here is better than anything I imagined. You fit here, like this place was waiting for you all along." Summer deepened into August, and Zachary settled into mountain life with surprising ease. She learned to read the weather in the clouds and the wind, to tell time by the sun's position, to navigate the trails without getting lost. Wyatt was an endlessly patient teacher, never making her feel foolish for not knowing things that were second nature to him. She finished his winter coat in mid-August, a massive garment lined with wool and reinforced at the shoulders and elbows. When he tried it on, it fit perfectly, and he looked like some ancient warrior king wrapped in furs. "This will last me 10 winters, he said, examining her careful stitching with admiration. "You have got a gift, Zachary. This is art." She also made curtains for all the windows, using fabric he had traded for along with some material from her own dresses that she had brought from Missouri. The curtains transformed the cabin, making it feel more finished and homey. She made a quilt too, sitting on the porch in the evenings while Wyatt worked on his various projects, her needle moving in steady rhythm. In September, they made a trip down to Custer for supplies. The town felt foreign now, too loud and rushed and crowded. People stared at them, the odd couple. But she noticed women looking at Wyatt with envy that he belonged to her, and she felt a small surge of pride. At the general store, Mr. Hobbs asked how married life was treating them. "I have no complaints," Wyatt said, his hand finding the small of Zachary's back. "My wife is the best thing that ever happened to me." Sarah and Ruth were delighted to see her looking so healthy and happy. "You are practically glowing," Ruth said. "Mountain life agrees with you." "It does," Zachary agreed. "Or maybe it is just having a husband who does not care if I take an hour to get ready in the morning." They purchased flour, sugar, coffee, ammunition, and various other supplies they could not produce themselves. Wyatt also surprised her by buying fabric in her favorite shade of blue. "For a new dress," he said. "You should have nice things even up in the mountains." On the ride back, they encountered another mountain man leading a pack train down from the higher elevations. He was older than Wyatt, grizzled and weathered, and he stopped to talk. "Wyatt Garrison, as I live and breathe. Heard you got yourself married. Folks said you had lost your mind taking a town woman up to your cabin." "Folks say a lot of things," Wyatt replied evenly. "Most of them nonsense. This is my wife, Zachary." The old man studied her with shrewd eyes. "You happy up there, missus?" "Very much so," she said firmly. Then I guess Wyatt did not lose his mind after all. Just found someone with sense enough to appreciate what he built. Good luck to you both. As they climbed back into the mountains, Zachary thought about how many people had opinions about her life and her choices, and how little those opinions mattered when she was this content. Autumn came to the mountains in a blaze of gold and crimson. Wyatt took her hunting, teaching her to shoot and track and move quietly through the forest. She proved to be a decent shot, patient enough to wait for the right moment and steady enough to make it count. They harvested the garden together, preserving vegetables in jars and storing root vegetables in the cool cellar Wyatt had dug beneath the cabin. She learned to make jerky and smoke meat, to render fat for candles and soap, to tan hides and cure leather. Every skill was another piece of self-sufficiency, another way of belonging in this wild place. In October, the first snow came, just a dusting that melted by afternoon. Wyatt began preparing for winter in earnest, chopping massive amounts of firewood and stacking it under cover near the cabin. She helped as she could, carrying and stacking while he split the logs with powerful swings of the axe. Watching him work, muscles flexing under his shirt, sweat gleaming on his skin despite the cool air, made her feel things that still surprised her with their intensity. He caught her watching one afternoon and grinned. "See something interesting, wife?" "Just admiring the view," she replied with more boldness than she had known she possessed. He set down the axe and crossed to her, pulling her close despite being sweaty and dirty. "The view admires you right back, every single day." That night, they made love in front of the fire, taking their time as always, learning each other in the flickering light. Afterward, wrapped in quilts, she traced the scars on his chest and arms, marks from the war and from years of hard living. "Do they hurt?" she asked. "Not anymore. They are just reminders now. Evidence that I survived things I was not sure I would." "I have scars too," she said softly. "Not on my skin, but inside. From losing everyone, from feeling like I was never quite right for the world." "You are exactly right," he said fiercely. "The world just was not seeing you clearly. But I see you, Zachary, all of you, and you are perfect." November brought heavier snows and shorter days. They settled into winter routines, spending long hours inside while storms raged outside. Wyatt taught her to read tracks in the snow, to understand animal behavior in winter, to navigate by stars when the sky was clear. She taught him more complex sewing techniques, and he proved surprisingly adept at the detailed work when he applied himself. They read aloud to each other in the evenings, working through his collection of books. She loved listening to his deep voice bringing stories to life, and he said her reading voice had a musical quality that made even dry passages interesting. On a clear day in late November, Wyatt took her to a place he called his thinking spot, a rocky outcrop that overlooked miles of snow-covered mountains. The view was breathtaking. Pristine white peaks against blue sky, forests of dark green pines, and the ribbon of silver that was their creek winding through the valley. "I used to come here when I needed to make decisions," he said, standing behind her with his arms wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on the top of her head. "After Margaret died, I came here and decided I would stay in the mountains rather than going back to civilization. And a few months ago, I came here and admitted to myself that I was lonely, that maybe I should try to find companionship again." "Is that why you came to town looking for a seamstress?" she asked. "Partly. I really did need the clothes made. But I also think some part of me was looking for a reason to connect with people again, to see if there might be someone who understood this life. When Mr. Hobbs mentioned you and said you were careful and particular about your work, something told me to at least meet you." "I am glad you listened to that something," she said. "Me too. Best decision I ever made." They stood together in the cold, bright air, and Zachary felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. This life was nothing like what she had imagined for herself back in Missouri. It was harder physically, more isolated, less conventional, but it was also more fulfilling, more honest, and more loving than anything she had dared to hope for. December brought deep snow and bitter cold. They were snowed in for days at a time, completely isolated from the outside world, but the cabin stayed warm and well-stocked. And Zachary found she did not mind the isolation at all. She had Wyatt, she had her work, she had books and projects, and a husband who made her laugh and held her close at night, and never once made her feel like she needed to be anyone other than exactly who she was. On Christmas, they exchanged simple gifts. She had made him new gloves, lined with rabbit fur and embroidered with his initials. He had carved her a beautiful jewelry box from cedar, with a design of mountains and pines on the lid, and her initials worked into the pattern. "It is beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "You made this?" "Been working on it at night after you fall asleep. Wanted it to be a surprise." Inside the box was a delicate silver chain with a small pendant, a simple mountain peak. "It was Margaret's," he said quietly. "The only piece of jewelry she brought up here. I want you to have it, not to replace her, but because I think she would have liked you and would have wanted you to have something of meaning." Zachary felt tears prick her eyes as she lifted the chain. "Are you certain?" "Completely. You are my wife, my life now. This is part of our history, and I want you to wear it." He fastened it around her neck, and she touched the small pendant, feeling the weight of meaning it carried. They celebrated quietly, cooking a special dinner from their preserved stores and drinking a bottle of whiskey Wyatt had been saving. They talked about the year past and the year ahead, making plans for spring and summer. "I want to expand the garden," Zachary said. "Maybe add a greenhouse so we can grow vegetables even in winter." "I can build that," Wyatt agreed. "And I have been thinking about getting a cow, so we would have fresh milk and butter year-round." "I would like that. And maybe we could try for a baby next year if you still want children." His eyes lit up. "I want children with you more than anything. A whole cabin full of them, if we are blessed. Little girls with your eyes and little boys with your careful nature. Or little boys with your strength and little girls with your patience," she countered. "Either way, they will be lucky to have you as their mother." January and February were the hardest months. With storms that lasted days and temperatures that dropped so low, the water in the pitcher froze overnight despite the fire. But the cabin held strong, and they stayed warm and safe inside. Zachary worked on sewing projects, making baby clothes in hopeful preparation. Wyatt worked on repairs and maintenance, keeping everything in good order. They made love often during the long winter nights, and by late February, Zachary suspected she might be pregnant. She waited to be certain, taking her time as always, observing the signs and changes in her body with careful attention. In early March, she told Wyatt over breakfast, "I think I am going to have a baby. I am not completely certain yet, but all the signs are there." He went very still, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. Then he set it down carefully and came around the table to kneel beside her chair. "Truly?" His voice was rough with emotion. "Truly. Probably due in late October or early November, if I am calculating correctly." He pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair. She felt moisture on her neck and realized he was crying. "Wyatt, are you all right?" "I am better than all right. I am overwhelmed. After Margaret died, I thought I would never have this, never have a family again. And now I have you and a baby coming, and it feels like more blessing than I deserve." "You deserve every good thing," she said fiercely. "You are the best man I have ever known." As winter released its grip and spring emerged, Zachary's pregnancy became obvious. Her body changed, growing round with new life. Wyatt treated her like she was made of spun glass, insisting she rest and let him do the heavy work. "I am pregnant, not broken," she protested when he tried to keep her from carrying water. "I know, but I can carry water, and you are growing our child. Seems like a fair division of labor." She could not argue with that logic, especially when he looked at her with such open adoration. In April, they made a trip down to Custer to see the doctor and stock up on supplies before the baby came. The doctor confirmed what she already knew. She was healthy, the pregnancy was progressing well, and the baby should arrive in late autumn. "You will want to come down before the birth," the doctor advised, "just in case there are complications. Mountain cabins are no place for delivering babies if something goes wrong." But Wyatt shook his head firmly. "My wife will deliver at home, where she is comfortable and safe. I have delivered foals and calves and puppies. I know what to watch for, and I will not let anything happen to her or the baby." The doctor frowned. "It is different with people, Mr. Garrison." "Perhaps, but the closest town is 8 miles away over difficult terrain. If complications happen during labor, we would never make it down in time anyway. At least at home, we have everything we need and no panic. I appreciate your advice, but we will manage." Zachary took his hand, squeezing it in support. She trusted Wyatt completely, and the thought of leaving their cabin to deliver in town among strangers made her anxious. They returned to the mountains with supplies and several books on childbirth that the doctor reluctantly provided. Zachary read them cover to cover, taking notes and asking Wyatt questions. He answered everything honestly, including his concerns and what they should prepare for. "I will not lie and say, 'Nothing can go wrong,'" he said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Birth is dangerous. But women have been having babies since the beginning of time, in places far worse than our comfortable cabin. You are strong and healthy, and I will do everything in my power to keep both of you safe." "I know you will," she said simply. "I trust you completely." Summer was glorious that year. The mountains exploded with wildflowers, and the days were long and warm. Zachary's belly grew round and heavy, and she felt the baby move inside her with increasing frequency. Wyatt would put his hand on her stomach and laugh with delight when he felt the kicks. "Strong baby," he said proudly, "already fighting." "Or dancing," she countered. "Maybe we are having a dancer." They prepared the cabin for the baby's arrival, clearing out a corner of their bedroom for a cradle that Wyatt built with his own hands. It was beautiful work, carved from pine and sanded smooth, with a gentle rocking motion. Zachary made tiny quilts and gowns from soft fabric, embroidering each piece with care. In August, they celebrated 1 year since they had met. Wyatt gave her wildflowers he had picked from the high meadows, and she gave him a new leather belt she had tooled with an intricate pattern. 1 year, she said, leaning against him as they sat on the porch. "It feels like longer, like I have known you forever." "Best year of my life," he said, "and it just keeps getting better." September was warm and golden, the mountains dressed in autumn colors. Zachary was large and uncomfortable now, her back aching and her feet swollen. But she refused to complain. Wyatt did everything he could to make her comfortable, rubbing her feet and back, helping her with tasks that had become difficult, being endlessly patient with her mood swings and tears. "I'm sorry I'm so emotional," she said one afternoon after crying over a broken dish. "Do not be sorry. You are growing a whole human being inside your body. That is exhausting and overwhelming. Cry all you need. I am not going anywhere." On an October morning, when the first frost touched the ground, Zachary woke to cramping pains that she recognized from her reading. Labor was beginning. She lay still for a moment, feeling the tightening sensation across her belly, then reached over to wake Wyatt. "It is time," she said quietly. He was awake instantly, focused and calm. "How far apart are the pains?" "That was the first one. I just woke up." "All right, we have time then. Let me get everything ready." He moved through the cabin with efficient purpose, building up the fire, heating water, laying out the supplies they had prepared. Clean linens, scissors, thread, blankets. He helped her into the birthing gown she had made, loose and easy to move in. The labor progressed slowly over the course of the day. The contractions came and went in waves, growing gradually stronger and closer together. Wyatt stayed with her the entire time, letting her grip his hands during the hard pains, rubbing her back, offering water and encouraging words. "You are doing perfectly," he told her. "Strong and steady, just like everything else you do. No rush. The baby will come when ready." As afternoon faded into evening, the contractions intensified. Zachary walked the cabin between pains, moved to all fours during them, tried different positions as her body demanded. Wyatt followed her lead, supporting her however she needed, never showing fear or uncertainty even though she knew he must be feeling both. Night fell, and the labor entered its most intense phase. Zachary felt like she was being torn apart from the inside, but Wyatt's steady presence kept her grounded. "Almost there," he said, having checked her progress. "I can see the baby's head. A few more strong pushes, and we will meet our child." She bore down with everything she had, feeling like she was turning inside out. And then suddenly there was release and relief and the piercing cry of a newborn filling the cabin. "A boy," Wyatt said, his voice thick with emotion. "We have a son, Zachary." He placed the squirming, crying baby on her chest, and she looked down at the tiny red face, the dark hair, the perfect little fingers waving in the air. Love crashed over her like a wave, instant and overwhelming. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Wyatt cut the cord and delivered the afterbirth, handling everything with the same calm competence he showed in all things. Then he cleaned the baby gently while Zachary delivered the placenta, wrapped their son in soft blankets, and returned him to her arms. "What should we name him?" Zachary asked, unable to look away from their baby's face. "What about William?" Wyatt suggested. "After my father, William Garrison." "William," she repeated, testing it. "Will for short, I like it. William Zachary Garrison." "Perfect." Wyatt sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, looking down at their son with an expression of pure wonder. "You did amazingly. You were so strong." "We did it together," she said, leaning against him, "like everything else." The next weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings. William proved to be a healthy baby with strong lungs and a good appetite. Zachary was exhausted but happier than she had ever been. Watching Wyatt become a father, he was wonderful with the baby, handling the tiny body with surprising gentleness despite his large hands. He walked the floor with William in the middle of the night, sang to him in his deep voice, changed diapers without complaint, and looked at his son like he was the most precious thing in the world. "You are a natural," Zachary told him one morning, watching him cradle William while she made breakfast. "I am terrified every moment that I will drop him or hold him wrong or do something that breaks him," Wyatt admitted. "But I love him so much it actually hurts. I did not know I could feel this much." Winter came again, but this year it felt different with a baby in the cabin. The small sounds of William's breathing, his cries, his tiny grunts and sighs filled the space with life. They took turns walking him when he fussed. And more than once Zachary woke to find Wyatt asleep in the rocking chair with William on his chest, both of them breathing in unison. On Christmas, William was 2 months old and starting to smile. They celebrated quietly, just the three of them, and Zachary felt a sense of completeness so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "What are you thinking?" Wyatt asked, seeing her expression. "That 2 years ago I was alone in Missouri, buried under grief and convinced I would never be happy again. And now I am here in the mountains with a husband I love and a beautiful baby and a life that fits me perfectly. It is almost too much blessing to comprehend." "Not too much," he said, pulling her close. "Exactly right. You deserved every bit of happiness you got coming, and I am honored to be part of giving it to you." William grew through winter and spring, hitting all his milestones. Rolling over, sitting up, babbling his first sounds. Wyatt was there for every moment, documenting his son's growth with the same attention to detail that Zachary brought to her sewing. In the spring, when William was 6 months old, they made their first trip to Custer as a family. People stared at them even more than before. The enormous mountain man, his wife, and their baby creating quite a picture. But Zachary did not care about the stares. At the general store, Mr. Hobbs came around the counter to admire William. "Fine-looking boy," he said. "Looks like his father." "He has his mother's temperament, though," Wyatt said proudly. "Calm and thoughtful. Does not cry unless he really needs something." "He takes his time," Zachary added with a smile. "Wonder where he gets that from." They purchased supplies and gifts for William, including a stuffed bear that Mrs. Hobbs had made when she heard about the baby. On the ride back to the mountains, William slept in a sling against Zachary's chest, safe and warm. Summer brought new adventures as William became mobile. He started crawling, then pulling himself up on furniture. Wyatt built a fence around the porch so William could play outside safely. And they spent hours watching him explore his small world with intense curiosity. "He is going to be smart," Wyatt predicted. "Look how focused he gets when he is examining things." "He is going to be thorough," Zachary agreed. "Takes after his parents." In autumn, when William was a year old, Zachary discovered she was pregnant again. She had suspected for weeks, but waited to be certain before telling Wyatt. "Another baby?" His face lit up like sunrise. "William is going to be a big brother?" "In late spring, I think, May or June." He picked her up and spun her around, laughing, then set her down carefully and dropped to his knees to kiss her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. Your brother's waiting to meet you." William toddled over, curious about his father's antics, and Wyatt scooped him up too. "You are going to have a brother or sister, Will. Someone to play with and teach things to." The pregnancy was easier than the first. Perhaps because Zachary knew what to expect, or perhaps because she was too busy with William to worry as much. Wyatt continued to be attentive and helpful, taking on extra tasks so she could rest when William napped. Winter passed more quickly this time, filled with a toddler's needs and preparations for the new baby. Wyatt built a second cradle, and Zachary made more tiny clothes, sometimes with William helping by playing with scraps of fabric. Spring arrived with warming temperatures and melting snow. In May, when the wildflowers were just beginning to bloom, Zachary went into labor with her second child. This delivery was faster than the first, only 6 hours from start to finish. Wyatt stayed calm and capable throughout, and when the baby emerged crying lustily, he announced, "Another boy. 2 sons, Zachary. We are blessed." They named him Walter, after Wyatt's brother who had died in the war. Walter Garrison had a shock of dark hair like his father and his mother's gray-green eyes. William was initially uncertain about the new baby, but quickly warmed to having a brother, wanting to help with everything. Life settled into a new rhythm, with 2 small children. The cabin felt full of noise and love, and constant motion. Wyatt built additions to the cabin, creating a separate bedroom for the boys and expanding the main room. Zachary sewed clothes faster than the boys could grow out of them and taught William his letters while Walter nursed. Years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. William was thoughtful and careful like his mother, taking his time with everything and examining the world with intense focus. Walter was bold and adventurous like his father, climbing everything and diving into new experiences without hesitation. When William was 5 and Walter was 3, Zachary discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the baby was a girl, born on a snowy December morning with her father's blue eyes and her mother's blonde hair. They named her Willow, and her brothers were fascinated by their tiny sister. The cabin grew again, rooms added to accommodate the growing family. Wyatt built furniture, and Zachary made quilts and curtains. They had milk cows now, and a larger garden, and a life that was full and rich, and exactly what they had built together. When Zachary was 30, 10 years after she had first arrived at the cabin, she stood on the porch one morning watching Wyatt teach William and Walter how to chop wood while Willow played nearby with her doll. She thought about the young woman who had stepped off the stage in Custer so many years ago, uncertain and grieving and convinced she did not fit anywhere. That woman had found her place in these mountains with a patient man who loved her exactly as she was. She had built a life that honored her careful nature, surrounded by people who never rushed her, in a home that felt more real than anywhere she had lived before. Wyatt looked up from his work and caught her watching. He said something to the boys and walked over to the porch, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her head. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how grateful I am for everything. For you, for our children, for this life we built. About how I used to apologize constantly for being slow. And now I am surrounded by people who love that I take my time." "I meant what I said that first morning," he murmured against her hair. "I have got all the time in the world for you. Always have, always will. You are worth every second of waiting, every moment of patience. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Zachary Garrison." She turned in his arms and kissed him, tasting home and love and the future stretching out before them. They stood together on the porch they had built, watching their children play in the yard they had cleared, living in the mountains they had claimed as their own. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that this was exactly where she belonged. The years continued to unfold with gentle grace. William grew into a young man who studied everything with his mother's meticulous attention, becoming an expert tracker and hunter by his teens. Walter was fearless and strong, already taller than most men by 15. Willow was sweet and creative, filling the cabin with drawings and stories, learning to sew from her mother and woodwork from her father. When Zachary was 35, she gave birth to one more child, another boy they named Waylon. He was a happy, easy baby who rarely cried and seemed content to observe the world with wide, curious eyes. The children grew and thrived in the mountains. They learned to read and write from their parents, to hunt and track and survive from their father, to sew and cook and preserve food from their mother. They learned patience and thoroughness and the value of taking time to do things right. Occasionally, people from Custer would make the trek up to the Garrison cabin, curious about the family living in isolation. They always left impressed by the children's manners, the family's self-sufficiency, and the obvious love that filled the home. When William was 18, a young woman from Custer began making excuses to visit, drawn by his quiet strength and careful nature. Wyatt teased his son gently, while Zachary helped him navigate the complexities of courtship. "Take your time getting to know her," she advised. "Do not let anyone rush you into decisions. The right person will be patient." William nodded seriously. "Like father was with you." Exactly like that. Walter showed interest in becoming a guide for hunters and prospectors, using his knowledge of the mountains to help others. Willow talked about opening a dress shop someday, combining her mother's skills with her own artistic vision. Wyatt and Zachary watched their children grow into capable adults, with pride and a touch of melancholy. The cabin that had once felt so full gradually emptied as the children found their own paths. But even when the children were grown and starting families of their own, they always came home to the mountains for holidays and celebrations. The cabin expanded again to accommodate grandchildren, and Wyatt built a second structure nearby where William and his wife could live while starting their own mountain life. Zachary and Wyatt grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies showing the wear of hard living. But their love never diminished. Every morning, Wyatt still waited patiently, while Zachary took her time getting ready. Every evening, they still sat together on the porch watching the sunset. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children surprised them with a celebration at the cabin. All 4 children were there with their spouses and children, filling the clearing with noise and laughter. A preacher even came up from Custer to renew their vows. Standing before their family, Zachary looked at Wyatt and saw the same mountain man who had waited patiently outside the boarding house so many years ago. His hair was gray now, his face more lined, but his blue eyes still looked at her with the same adoration. "I vow to continue loving you with patience and devotion," Wyatt said, his voice still deep and strong. "To wait for you every morning and every moment of every day, because you are worth all the time in the world." "I vow to continue loving you with my whole heart," Zachary replied. "To build this life with you for as many years as we are given, and to be grateful every day that you saw me exactly as I was and decided that was enough." "Not just enough," he corrected gently. "Perfect." They kissed while their family cheered, and Zachary felt the same flutter of joy she had felt at their first kiss all those years ago. That evening, after the celebration ended, and the guests had settled into various sleeping spots around the expanded cabin, Zachary and Wyatt walked up to his thinking spot. The moon was bright, painting the mountains in silver light. "Do you remember the first time you brought me here?" Zachary asked. "I remember everything about our time together," Wyatt said. "Every conversation, every moment. It is all precious to me." "Me too. Sometimes I think about that young woman who came west running from grief, and I want to tell her that everything will be all right. Better than all right. That she will find love and purpose and a life that fits her perfectly. She found it because she was brave enough to take a chance on a strange mountain man," Wyatt said. "And I found everything I needed because a careful, patient woman agreed to stay." They stood together, looking out over the moonlit mountains, the valley that had become their kingdom, the life they had built from patience and love and mutual respect. "I would do it all again," Zachary said softly. Every moment, every choice, everything that led us here. So would I, Wyatt agreed, 1,000 times over. They walked back to the cabin, hand in hand, moving slowly because their joints ached now and the path was uneven. But neither minded the slowness. They had learned long ago that the best things in life were worth taking time for. Inside the cabin, grandchildren slept in cozy nooks while their parents talked quietly by the fire. Zachary and Wyatt climbed to their loft bedroom, the space they had shared for so many years. As they settled into bed, Wyatt pulled her close, her head resting on his chest, his arms secure around her. "I love you," he murmured into her hair. "More today than yesterday, more tomorrow than today." "I love you too," she replied. "My patient, wonderful mountain man." They fell asleep to the sounds of their family below, the wind in the pines outside, the creek murmuring its eternal song. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life based on patience and acceptance, who had proven that the best love stories were not about rushing or compromising, but about finding someone who loved you exactly as you were. In the mountains of South Dakota, in a cabin built by hand and filled with love, Zachary and Wyatt Garrison had found their happily ever after. And it was more perfect than any fairy tale because it was real, built moment by patient moment, over a lifetime of taking their time and never regretting a single second.